Это Нюши, наш институт Нюши.
Надежда Gerasimenko from the High School of Economics. The topic of your talk is taking care of a digital pet, autonomous emotions in video games.
Так, видно, слышно, все хорошо?
Да, все хорошо.
Да, тогда я начну. Я думаю,
So let me begin. I think I will build on what Daria spoke about, and I will suggest one of the possible versions of the way to discuss digital pets. I will focus on the digital aspect of this conversation, the methodology first. Here are the authors that I referred to. I am interested in the audio-visual components of the game, its gameplay, the rules of the game, and its reception and operation. I also use Wolfgang Iser's implicit player. He spoke about an implicit reader. And an implicit reader is a perfect, non-existing subject that can ideally understand a text and respond to all the stimuli to get all the right meanings. And in this sense, I'm talking about an implicit player who plays the game the way it is supposed to be played. And what is important in my case, his or her emotional response is the same as the game designers planned. I also understand Kia as an intentional process, and a bit later on, I will dwell on that. I separate care and emotions, which is important for me. I don't say that a caring action explains anything in itself, because what matters to me is the emotional aspect, and I understand emotions as lasting, intelligible experience of the played game. So here it's important for me to differentiate emotions from affects, because affects I understand as bursts of feeling, which are hard to control, and emotions are prone to reflection and they are more durable. And I'm going to analyze two mobile games. Why mobile? As Daria spoke about Tamagotchi, they are always with a human being, with a player. And of course, the role of Tamagotchi or the companion is played by a mobile phone. The first game is Smallzes. It's a game for kids. And it's very interesting that this game does not have any text at all, because the players who interact with the game maybe cannot read. I will explain the gameplay. As you can see in Smallzes, there are a lot of pets at once. They're all in a horizontally oriented space. This is a house, a few rooms in that house, a garden, and the pets move freely around this space. They can express simple feelings and emotions, and they can interact with each other. Also, in this space, there are different objects that the pets can interact with. For example, you can see the pink pet now being in a pool, and a player can take part in this games with the pets. For example, if I clicked on this pet, he would jump out of the pool. The pets have their needs. They don't have a scale of needs, they cannot die. So care is a choice of the player. I mean, if you don't take care of them, nothing will happen. They can go to bed themselves, you can feed them, but that's not an obligation. The main goal of the game is to open all possible pets. Here, all of them are open in my gameplay. You can open them in two manners. You can buy half of them with the coins, which shall be earned in mini games, and half of them can be got through coupling. And you can see this machine, this blue machine to the right. If you put two pets there, they produce a third pet. They lay an egg. The next topic for discussion is emotions. And here are two emotions that I highlighted. The first one is the feeling of cuteness. You can see that the eyes are huge. The music is cute. Everything is calm. So there is nothing scary in this game. So the emotion is tenderness, I believe. So that's the emotion that the game designers are aiming for. And this effect in turn will cause care. And in A Simulation versus Narrative by Frasca, he highlights two types of game, Ludus and Paideia. In one types of the game, the telos of the game, the goals of the game are set in advance, and the player can either lose or fail. And in the second type of the game, the player can choose the goals for themselves. Simulation is closer to the second type. Here, the curing actions are understood as possible actions of the player. He or she can decide to take care. And the second emotion is the desire to win. The player may have a table with the pets that they open or don't. So the victory basically is when you open all pets. I saw a few of gameplays on YouTube. Normally, after all the pets are opened, the YouTubers stop making videos about this game because this is like the game is passed. So these are the implicit emotions, and care is a choice. These are 2 points that I wanted to make. The second game that I analyze is Dogotchi. Daria has reminded us of Tamagotchi. Dogotchi is based on that series a lot. In it, we take care of a dog. It has a scale of needs, which you can see in the upper panel. And there are buttons which can satisfy these needs. To make the pet happy, you need to play games. The rest is just a click. The audio-visual design here refers to Tamagotchi, not just because of the pixels, but also because 8-bit sounds, which all of you remember if you used to play Tamagotchi. What matters here is that the pet can die. You can see in the second screen that the dog is sick. Her needs are not satisfied. If we click on the medical care button below, then the dog will recover. But if she is ill for too long, then she will die. And then we can try again from the very beginning. What matters to me here is that as the game develops, you can open new breeds and the dog gets older. This is a very, very slow process. I mean, I interacted with this game for a long time, but I never reached a new breed and I never realized how to do it. So I suspect that the main gameplay is Kia. And here are the implicit emotions that the player has to feel towards this game. That is nostalgic feeling and the feeling of guilt. The nostalgic feeling here is seen in the audio visual design. Tamagotchi was popular at the end of the 90s, the beginning of 2000s. So the players who interacted with Tamagotchi now are around 20 or 30. And this game is for them to remember this interaction with Tamagotchi that they had in their childhood. And the second emotion is the feeling of guilt. I guess that it develops because the dog doesn't have any purpose in her life, because the dog is not independent and she cannot even wake up without clicking on the button, and it all stimulates the feeling of guilt. So the player thinks that he or she has to go back to the game all the time because they feel responsible, and the feeling of guilt returns the player to the game. The feeling of guilt directly stimulates returning to the game, and the nostalgic feeling indirectly stimulates the process of care. So these are two video games, Dogotchi and Smallzes, and a very simple syllogism can be developed from this. And I will show that it's more interesting than it looks like. Care is a game process. Emotions stimulate care. Emotions can stimulate game processes. This is a simple thought, but I will elaborate on that now.
Во-первых, важно, какие именно эмоции стимулируют игровые процессы.
It's important which emotions precisely can stimulate game process. These emotions are complex.
Ну, то есть, как бы, во-первых, когда мы говорим про Dagotchi, в первую очередь, то у нас
They're
есть
liminal, they're difficult. If we talk about Tamagotchi, for example, nostalgic feelings and the feeling of guilt are quite difficult emotions, which you do not really expect from such a game. You do not expect such a complexity in the lived experience, and I think it is important to
в игре нам больше рассказать. И во-вторых, для меня очень важно, что спектр эмоций, которые видеоигры вызывают,
the spectrum of emotions that these games cause, we can see them here in the simulation,
только желанием достичь каких-то внутренних целей игры.
are not limited to the competitive aspect. And it is important for me because I read the classical work on game design by Shell, which shows a very interesting divisions into different emotions that can attract boys and girls. Which is a weird division, as it seemed to me. It said that girls like to care, and care was understood as a specific emotion, which is self-evident, which is not divided into any other emotions. I think that this division into emotions for boys and girls is strange. The spectrum of possible emotions, it does not only deal with competition, and care is not a self-sustained feeling. It can be subdivided into more difficult feelings and emotions. The emotions can stimulate game process, and it's important to me that stimulation can happen on all the levels of the video game. The visual design, the sound design, the rules of the game. And yet again, it shows that a complex analysis will be required. We cannot limit ourselves to game mechanics only. The game exists as a whole, and one has to consider all its parts. As for game processes, an interesting conclusion that I draw on Smallzes, it says that care does not have to be the center of gameplay in games about digital pets. This is not the most evident thought, but we can see that care becomes one of the choices of the player, as I showed before. Also, the emotions depend on the game, but these emotions don't have to deal with the main narrative of the game. There are autonomous emotions, we can say. They are self-sustained and they cannot bring to the player anything apart from themselves. I think this is a very curious factor which can tell us something more about the interaction between a computer and a human, that this interaction doesn't have to be utilitarian. What I suggest is getting rid of categorization, because it is quite clear that they're built in very different manners. I mean, all care games are very different. And what we need here is particular case-by-case analysis. It's quite evident, that games also can help a human being better understand their emotions. And here we enter the effective computing feeling in one of the interpretations of effective computing. And it can help us orient in game design, and they can help us navigate the question of the interaction of human being and computer as the other. Also, it can embellish our research if we analyze the non-implicit player and his or her emotions. We can use a transgressive play as a term by R. Seth here, who wrote that there is the right way of going through the game and there are wrong ways of going through the game, in inverted columns. The players can bypass any kinds of rules, and we can see what emotions emerge in this transgressive game. What emotions emerge as we bypass the desires by game designers. I think this shouldn't be marginalized. This should be discussed. This is all I had to say. Thank you very much. Sorry if I spoke too fast. Thank you. Nadezhda, thank you very much for your talk. It's great that you kept it short and we have more time for the questions. We have some questions in the chat already. Would you like to read them out? No? Okay, then I will read them out. So the first question from Andrei. Is there any difference between implicit player and the target audience?
Мне кажется, что, во-первых, это просто термины из разных
I
областей.
think these are just terms from different areas of knowledge. The target audience is about marketing and an implicit player is about game studies. Yeah, I think that the difference exists because when we talk about the target audience, these are rather quantitative data. It's more general. When we're talking about the implicit player, it can give ground for more detailed analysis. We can discuss specific parts of the game, how they should be perceived. We can talk about emotions. I think it's more difficult to discuss it for the target audience. So I think this term gives ground for a more precise analysis. Is it okay if I add a couple of words here? I think that the implicit player is more about the requirements for the target player, and the target audience are the real players, as I understand it. We had another question. Daria, would you like to ask it yourself? Okay, I will read it. Daria, our previous speaker, do you think that what boys and girls are looking for in the games is the same?
Мне кажется, в смысле, ищут в играх мальчики и девочки или по...
Ну да, совершенно верно. Вы говорили, что да, вот вы не согласны с тем
Yeah, is it
разделением.
that you disagree with this division which has been introduced?
Этого разделения нет.
So you think that this gender-based division is non-existent?
Ну, мне кажется, что... Ну, во-первых, я не специалист по
Well,
гендерной...
first of all, I'm not an expert in gender studies, and I won't be able to answer this question exhaustively. but I think it's quite strange to connect boys and girls into homogeneous groups that are looking for the same things, because people are very different and gender should not be the basis
Ну и да, мне кажется, что, в принципе, идея о том, что девочки хотят в играх заботиться, готовить и так далее, это же очень...
for any kind of categorization. And I think this thought that girls want to take care is patriarchal, which would be maybe stated by girls themselves. So I think it requires more empirical research, the statement. And generalizations, I think, don't work too well in general. Yeah. Yeah, this is quite a huge, complex problem. It cannot be solved in this way, but still, I think that this
Как бы какая-то крайность. Тогда такое-
difference is there, it exists. I mean, it's an extreme to
Идут на охоту, девочки
deny
идут-
this difference. Stating these extreme gender differences is an extreme. And now, today, we are turning to different extremes, like boys and girls are completely the same. So I think it's an extreme, kind of. Don't you think so?
Ну, сейчас я очень пытаюсь не смешивать свои политические убеждения со
I'm trying not to let my political views integrate my research views. I think that if we're taking the research perspective, here I insist on a more empirical analysis of what is happening.
Ну да, потому что говорить о девочках как о целых, ну это,
Because when we speak about girls
я думаю,
as a
что
kind of homogeneous group,
ну, то, что люди ищут в играх, зависит
I think what people are looking for in the games
возраст, это местоположение, это какой-то
depends on their age, on their background, on their location.
И ну, вот это такое большое объединение,
So when we generalize too much,
может быть, работает в поле геймдизайна, опять же, я не знаю,
it may work for game design again, I don't
с
know.
помощью геймстадис какой-то корректировки с...
But it requires for game studies more empirical research. So I'm all for case by case research and against generalizing.
Мгм. Спасибо. У нас еще есть вопросы от
Thank
коллег.
you.
Алексей, пожалуйста.
Alexei, you're welcome.
Да, спасибо большое, Надежда, за...
Thank you very much, Nadezhda, for your talk.
Я понял, что пока слушал вашу полемику.
As I was listening to your conversation now, I forgot the question that I wanted to ask, frankly. Ah, I was interested in the syllogism. Can you please return the slide?
Игровой процесс. Мгм. Ой. Я понял, я просто не успел уловить всю логику.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch the logic first.
Очевидно. Да, то есть, соответственно, эмоция стимулирует заботу и косвенно игровой
So
процесс.
emotions stimulate Kia and indirectly the game process. Yeah, okay, thank you. Then I have another question for clarification. The question was,
Объединять много разных самых практик под термином.
you said that we unite different practice, gather different practice under the term Kia, and you're against this term. What better terms do you think we could use
Конкретно для того, чтобы операционализировать это понятие.
to make this term operational, so to speak, so to get rid of this universalization? What I meant here rather was I'm not against the term care. I think that as a kind of an explanation for a game process, for the attitude that exists between a player and the pets in this case, or any other avatars and characters, this is a suitable term, indeed. But I mean, when we call something care and think that it explains everything, I believe it's oversimplification. So I suggest including emotional factors there and a more precise analysis of emotions. And I think we can pursue other ways of clarification too. I focus on the emotional aspect here. So I'm all for clarification or for specifying the term rather than just not using the term at all. I mean, when we use the term, we have to explain what we mean by this term using cases. This is what I meant. Yeah, thank you.
Коллеги, если у вас еще вопросы, у нас есть еще время.
Any other questions? We have a bit of time.
Так, если что, не стесняйтесь, задавайте, я тогда пока
Please
задам
ask your questions. You're most welcome. If you're still thinking, I will ask mine. At the beginning, you had this print screen with the pets with big eyes, and you also said that one can interact with these pets. You can play with the balls, with the pool, and you can also mate them to get more interesting pets. In your opinion,
проявлять к ним больше эмпатии, но
do you think it causes us to feel more empathy towards pets, but at the same time we can force them to do something like this option of mating? It inhibits a more ethical attitude towards pets. What do you think?
Но все-таки в Smallsys, вот в игре, про которую вы спрашиваете, в отличие от других видеоигр этого жанра, в принципе...
Smallsys, unlike all other video games of that genre, or at least other games that are also analyzed, the autonomy of the pets is much bigger. They are much more independent than in other games. But on the other hand, it's true that this enforcement seems even more out of place because they're shown as self-sustained subjects. Yeah, I agree that we can speak here about unethical behavior, which is related to the emotion, which I explain as the desire to win. Sometimes this emotion leads to a more utilitarian use, but at the same time, it's hard to imagine a simulator which wouldn't be that utilitarian, because I think that in any case, when somebody becomes an object of care or an object of interaction, the emphasis here is on the word object. So I agree with your comment, but I don't see any alternative. I would be curious if somebody could come up with a counterexample. Yeah, thank you. That's a good thought, right? If we have an object of care, that is an object anyway. If I remember Tamagotchi, for example, at least it was more about us being a kind of an instrument, a tool that takes care of a pet. And again, I'm quite subjective here because I was very small when I played Tamagotchi, but I had feelings that I needed to take care of that pet because I want that pet to be well. So I didn't have any leverage for, forcing the pet to do anything. So I think maybe it's about, the range of possible actions that the players can make towards the pets. maybe limiting the spectrum could be a step towards a more ethical stance towards a pet.
Да, конечно, вы можете прокомментировать, буду рада.
Мне кажется, я просто про тамагочи хотела сказать, что
I just wanted to speak about Tamagotchi. I think emotionally, this is a liminal case because on one hand, really, the pet requires care, but if it doesn't get any care, it will die, which will technically be bad for itself. So this object of care has the right, or the voting right, so to speak, or the right to speak out, the right of expression, but still they be left an object. The question in the chat, has anyone played Creatures? I'm not sure I know the game. I don't know it either. Okay, we will Google it. Sorry, we don't have any more time for discussion. Nadezhda, thank you very much for a brilliant talk.